oh, sorry. If you log on out here, we're going to get a feedback.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right, I'll go back. Just, okay. From Caribbean islands, Guyana and Belize, was born our University of the West Indies. A symbol of our oneness, our strength in unity. With vision clear, you came along to shape our destiny. To follow after knowledge, the truth to seek and find. To teach us love and justice, to liberate our mind. Today we see you rising, a light out of the west. Rise the feet of all who seek the noblest and the best. There is a light that is rising from out of the west, and our bearers of that light are we. So we follow those whose work has brought glory to your name, making a better world for you and for me. As from your noble portals, your sons and daughters go to face a world of challenges, to conquer every foe. We'll work and play together, and as time marches on, we'll never get the lesson that Ebola we are one. UWI we praise you, we lift our voice in song. We let our big drums roll loud and still and singing song. For you have shaped our lives so that we can truly sing. To you we owe our gratitude, as debts we can't repay. There is a light that is rising from out of the west, and forebearers of the light are we. So we follow those whose work has brought glory to your name, making a better world for you and for me. This is our University of the West Indies.
Welcome, welcome, welcome. Today we are having our Quality Assurance Review public lecture, and we are so happy to have you join us and to welcome you to this event. Without further ado, I would be handing over to our head of department, Dr. Vivette Milson-White, who is the head of the Department of Language, Linguistics, and Philosophy. Dr. Milson-White.
Master of Ceremonies, Dr. Karen Kumabash, other ladies and gentlemen, I am honored to welcome you on behalf of the Department of Language, Linguistics, and Philosophy to this evening's virtual public lecture being presented in collaboration with the Quality Assurance Unit. Together, you provide esteemed company in this virtual space this evening. Whether you are an officer of the University of the West Indies, a representative of the Office of the Board for Undergraduate Studies, a colleague from another campus of the University of the West Indies, a colleague from another university or another country, a representative from one of the sectors of education in Jamaica, a graduate or an undergraduate student from Jamaica or overseas, or if you describe yourself as just a well-wisher, I extend to you a truly hearty welcome. I also extend an extra special welcome to the team of reviewers of the Linguistics section. On this review team, we are honored to have student representative, Ms. Sania Compton from the UWI's Kville campus, a colleague lecturer in linguistics from the St. Augustine campus, Dr. Joan Ferreira, Ms. Nadine Logan Ashley, head of the Department of Language, Literacy and Literature at the Michael University, and Professor of Linguistics and the team lead, Professor Lars Hinrichs of just north of us, the University of Texas at Austin in the United States of America. Ladies and gentlemen, let me add some context for this evening's lecture. Sections and departments in our premier institution of higher learning in the region engage in routine self-study. However, the Quality Assurance Unit helps to ensure that we are providing enriching experiences for staff and students, and so they organize formal reviews. To that end, the coordinator of linguistics, Dr. Tressel Messom, and colleagues from the section, guided by the former head of department, Dr. Ingrid McLaren, did their self-assessment. And this week, we, and the administrative staff in our main office, collaborators, present students, alumni, employers of graduates of linguistics, the principal and his deputy, the campus registrar, the dean of the Faculty of Humanities and Education, and other stakeholders are in conversation with the team of evaluators. In another few weeks, that team will formally indicate strengths and areas that can be improved and offer suggestions, including suggestions for the officers of the university regarding linguistics. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we are normally concerned with developments in language for their own sake, for applications to the teaching of writing, among other subjects, and because of the implications for identity and philosophical perspectives of being and others in and within home countries such as Jamaica. But today, thanks to the Quality Assurance Unit's review arrangements that include a public lecture, Professor Lars Hinrichs will share with us from his vast studies in language to propose why we need diaspora linguistics. The Department of Language, Linguistics and Philosophy is delighted to have Professor Hinrichs leading the review team and presenting the lecture today, and equally pleased to have all of you in attendance this evening. So welcome again, everyone, to this virtual public lecture.
Thank you so much, Dr. Milson White. And for those of you just joining us, that was Dr. Milson White, the head of the Department of Language, Linguistics and Philosophy. And we are so happy to have you with us as we host Professor Hinrichs talking to us about why we need diaspora linguistics, challenges to establish models of language contact. This is so topical in the CARICOM region because we are a multilingual region, even though many are in denial. And to help bring us all out of denial into our true independence, Professor Hinrichs will be giving us guidance on how to work through the ways people view how all of these languages juxtapose in our multilingual environment. So thank you so much for joining us. At this point, I will be handing over to Dr. Anna Perkins, the Senior Program Officer of the Quality Assurance Unit of the UWI. Dr. Perkins.
Dr. Kumabash, thank you so much, and good afternoon to everyone. Just want to say a very warm welcome to you and to let you know that the Quality Assurance Unit is really happy to be collaborating with the Department of Language, Linguistics and Philosophy, particularly the Linguistics section. And as Dr. Milson White has explained to you, this lecture has its genesis in the Quality Assurance Review of the Linguistics section, which is taking place this week. And Professor Hinrichs is our team lead, and we're looking forward to some of what he's going to share with us this afternoon. But just to let you know that the QAU has been offering lectures of this sort since around 2009. It's one of the ways that we add value to this quality assurance review process, which Dr. Milson-White told a little bit about just a while ago. We recognize that when we invite persons to lead our teams, we're inviting academics and researchers of the highest quality, the highest caliber. How could we not then allow them to share with the UWI community something of the research that they're doing currently? And usually this would be done face-to-face, as you recognize, but we're in the pandemic space, and what that has done is that it has forced us online. So there's a crisis, but we're building on that opportunity. And so, like Dr. Milson-White, I want to just welcome everyone from all over the different global spaces that they may be joining us from. And those that can't join us, and we do know we've had some apologies, they will actually have access to the lecture at a later point by going on to the YouTube video. So to say to Professor Hinrichs with the S, and Lars is very particular about his S, and so I don't want to forget it. We're looking forward to what you're sharing with us this afternoon, and we're just hoping maybe you might demonstrate to us a little bit of the facility that we recognize that you have with our Jamaican language. So everyone, once again, welcome. It is so great to have you. And over to you again, Dr. Kumabash. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much, Dr. Perkins. We are very pleased to have the UWI machinery ensuring that what we offer our students is way more value than they expected. It is so critical to what we do. Thanks again, Dr. Perkins from the Quality Assurance Unit. We will now have Mr. Aquino Morgan. Mr. Morgan is one of our star graduate students. We are very proud to have him involved so much with the department. Mr. Morgan was one of the first executive members of our Linguistic Students Club called LOUD, and he is a past president as well. So Mr. Morgan is going to be telling us a little bit more about why Professor Hinrichs is so well suited to share with us all about language contact. Mr. Morgan.
Thank you, Dr. Kumabash. Chair of this evening's proceedings, Dr. Karen Kumabash. Head of the Department of Language, Linguistics, and Philosophy, Dr. Milson-White. Senior Program Officer in the Quality Assurance Unit, Dr. Anna Perkins. Faculty members, specially invited guests, students, good evening. It is my pleasure to introduce to you this evening's presenter. Professor Lars Hinrichs is a linguist interested in varieties of English. He holds a Master's of Arts degree from the he holds a Master's of Arts degree in German and English linguistics and literary studies from the University of Freiburg in Germany. His doctoral work, also at the University of Freiburg, focused on the use of English and Creole in online communication by Jamaicans. His research interest also extends to syntactic differences between British and American written English from a statistical perspective on phonetic variation in the speech of diasporic communities. He joined the University of Texas English Department in 2007 as an associate professor and currently directs the Texas English Project, which researches the different kinds of English spoken in Texas. Professor Hinrichs also serves as the chair of the organizing committee for the New Ways of Analyzing Variation team, also at the University of Texas, and has also served as a member of the International Scientific Committee Biennial International Conference on Linguistics of Contemporary English. He has published a number of books, articles, and edited book chapters, and has also given several presentations at conferences and universities across Europe, North America, and the Caribbean. It is therefore this evening my pleasure to introduce our presenter, Professor Lars Hinrichs. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me make him welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Morgan. And at this time, I am handing over to the man of the hour, Professor Hinrichs. Lars, we welcome you. Thank you so much for once more joining us here in the Caribbean. As colleagues, we really appreciate all that you have given to us already in terms of research collaboration and in very interesting discussions. So we thank you now and we hand over to you.
That is so nice. Can you hear me?
We can.
Not if you can hear me. Thank you very much. Thank you so much, Karen. Karen was the first Caribbean linguist I may have ever met in person. No, I did meet Dr. Devonish at a conference in Europe, but then first time I traveled to Jamaica, I was welcomed by Karen. She was a wee undergrad at the time, 20 years ago, if you can believe it. And thank you, Anna Perkins, who has been my boss this year. I would not want it any other way. And thank you, Dr. Milson-White, for introducing your department to us during this very intense and very interesting and rewarding week of review. I'm very grateful for that. Also, thank you, Aquino, who this week was the first time I met you, but you have been evidence that the department keeps going strong and turning out very able and beloved by their students, lecturers, as a recent graduate. So that's what I found out. If I found out nothing else during review week, we did find that out. So thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to present my work here. My work, by the way, I wanted to address the question, why does a nice young man from Germany devote his professional life to studying language in Jamaica? I don't have a great answer to it other than that is really what I was interested in and have been interested in consistently in my studies of linguistics. I have to, as many of us do these days, ask your forgiveness that I need to look into the rest of my house every once in a while because I'm alone with the kids. Just 1 second. Sweetie.
While Lars is doing that, I would just like to remind attendees that you are free to put your questions or comments in the chat, and we will be taking note of any questions that you have, any comments you want to share, so that Professor Hinrichs can address them later.
That sounds great. Okay. Am I allowed to share my screen now? So are my slides visible? Everybody seeing an aubergine backgrounded? Yes? Okay. Thank you very much. I've entitled this lecture, Why We Need Diaspora Sociolinguistics, Challenges to Established Models of Language Contact. And it's an overview of what I've been working on for at least 12 years now. Why do we need diaspora sociolinguistics? I have recently co-edited it's actually the current issue of Journal of Sociolinguistics that I've co-edited with Amelia Tseng. You see our names up here. The topic is mobility, polylingualism, and change towards an updated sociolinguistics of diaspora. And we make a number of arguments there in our introduction to the issue, why we should study variation in diasporic community. Amelia's own work is on Latinos in the United States, and I have been working on the speech of Jamaicans in Toronto. And then we have invited these other papers, which are I recommend all of these to your attention. They're all, you see, these are really well-known linguists who work on fascinating topics. And then Sariko Komowene and Cecile Vigouroux bring together the discussion in the closing chapter And so this is very current for me, but the main argument that we make here, why we need diaspora sociolinguistics, is that in a time when globalization is ever accelerating, diversity in urban centers is ever increasing, we need ways of studying the resulting kinds of cultural and linguistic mixes. And we need to do a little better than just saying, oh, wow, it's chaos. So just calling it chaos may not be enough. There is systematicity in variation. Looking at diasporic community is a way of focusing in on pieces of the puzzle that are in themselves ordered, and that can show us the logic of these mixes and these kinds of variation that we might be interested in. This is a screenshot of the head of our introduction. Doesn't really show you anything else other than what I've just said, but that is that recent issue. And I'm happy to share copies with anybody who would like to see it. If you want to get in touch through my website, that will be the easiest way to do that. So now in more detail, why diaspora sociolinguistics? As I said, it's a clearer, more controlled way to study language and globalization. You choose a diaspora community and look at how within that community languages start mixing and dialects start mixing. In the case of Jamaicans in Toronto, of course, we're interested in how Jamaican Creole mixes with Canadian English and how other varieties that are also in the social space co-enter this space of linguistic and cultural variation. We want to do this to enable us to better model variation and diversity in the city, and to improve, ultimately to improve our description of multicultural urban vernacular formation. Another way of referring to this phenomenon is describing multi-ethnolectalization, which is a topic that has precipitated from the last 20 years of linguistic work in big cities in Europe, led by work on London, where multi-ethnolectalization would not have happened had it not been for the large Jamaican community in London, or would not have happened in the way that it did. And to me, the most fascinating linguistic work of the last 2 decades has come out of London, describing the diasporic linguistic community. That's not the only interesting linguistic work that has come out, but the most interesting cohesive body of sociolinguistic work by a group of researchers such as Devyani Sharma, Paul Kurzweil, Sue Fox, Jenny Cheshire, and others. This is the outline of my talk. I wanted to talk about the community I studied in Toronto, my fieldwork and the data that I collected. I will address some of my linguistic questions in this work and present some conclusions. Allow me to make a brief interruption. I need to stop sharing and re-share to make sure that my settings are correct. I think we're looking good. So there we are again. So the community is the Toronto Jamaican community, which makes up 3 to 4% of the city's population. Of course, this is not terribly easy to count. The number is from the most recent census of Canada from 2016. The question is always, who self-identifies as Jamaican? There's more self-identified Jamaicans in Toronto than people who have a Jamaican passport. So having Jamaican heritage does qualify, but of course, at some point things get fuzzy. And if you're third or fourth generation, then it's pretty much up to you whether you're going to check that box on the census or not. So it's an approximation. What it is a very large minority within the city of Toronto. Immigration history begins in the late 1960s with the first really big wave being domestic workers immigrating from the Caribbean, led by Jamaica, into Canada, with the Trudeau the Older, the current prime minister's father, leading the lifting of burdens to immigration by Caribbean citizens, and inviting particularly Jamaican women to move into Canada, but soon they also brought the rest of their families. And as I said, the 1970s was the first big wave of immigration. It never really stopped, just got somewhat less when the legal hurdles started being put back up to some extent. Jamaica is a diverse majority Black population. By iconization and erasure, community members in Toronto are therefore within Toronto equated with Blackness. The idea of Blackness is not very important in Jamaica, but with immigration to Toronto, it becomes a contributing factor to identity, to social identity and individual identity. There are other African descended ethnicities in Toronto, all of them. For example, African Americans, Africans, other Caribbean ethnicities, South Americans, and so on. And there are also Jamaicans who are not Black yet. There is already equation that Black Canadian identity is the same as being Jamaican. So there's an essentialization, and Jamaican immigration to Toronto is basically what constitutes the lead contributing culture to Black Canadianness in terms of culture, in terms of Canadian identities, and so on. Those of you who have heard me talk about this before have probably seen me play this video. This is a 1-minute video that I'd like to play out of my field work. This is Carrie Mullings. She hosts the radio show Rebel Vibes. It's a Canadian reggae show, and this exemplifies something about the ideologies surrounding Jamaicanness, this sort of twofold appraisal. On the one hand, the overt prestige level, and on the other hand, the covert prestige dimension. Overtly, there is a reputation to protect. Carrie has a Jamaican father and is very concerned about protecting the image of Jamaicans in Toronto. She has this Canadian reggae show, and her goal is to present Jamaicans positively within the larger cultural space of the city. There's also the covert prestige of Jamaican language and culture, which comes out of the fact that Canadian reggae is a focalizing point for this multicultural radio station. It is the driving cultural contributor of this radio station, which is at the York University. And the video we're about to see shows us a cultural what am I trying to say? She's a broker, cultural broker at work. She's a go-between between her heritage culture, Jamaican culture, and the other half of her identity. Her mother is a white Canadian, mediating between the cultures is what she does partly in this radio show. So I hope you can hear the sound here.
Coming from humble, but before we do that.
Oh, normally when I play this to audiences, I do not apologize. There's some bad words in here, but knowing that there's a lot of native speakers of Jamaican Creole among the listeners, I would like to ask you to please forgive me for playing these obviously taboo words. The video is about how the occurrence of these taboo words, how this is dealt with.
Brother Jason, you got some more music for them? Talk up, my man. Tell ya.
Him can't talk, him busy dancing.
Him too busy dancing. We're going to run you. Where the mango? Where the mango? No mango. Why, Brother Jason? Imperial Sound, check him out on the MySpace. / Imperial Sound. You say rascal? You just say rascal? Yeah! Hey, we can't put our rascal on. You say rascal?
No, is it?
You say rascal?
No, is it?
No. Yeah? Andrew Brantz was asking you straight and direct what's really going on this time. We're going to have the pleasure of speaking to Miss Marcia Brown. I know she's heading to the CHRY studios to tell you about common law.
Okay. The only face I could see on Zoom here was Anna's face, but I think she took it stoically. The point is... The what?
Totally unfazed. It's
okay,
just
unfazed. The point is that Carrie's playing a Canadian reggae song that she had not vetted before playing it. And when it comes on, and she notices that there's taboo language in the song, she turns it off and glosses over it. And when I talked to her days later, I asked her why. I asked her, is this to protect the older generation who might be listening to this? She says, no, it's more because this is what the Anglo population in Toronto thinks we talk like. And indeed, if you talk to anybody without Jamaican heritage who lives in Canada, what they know about Jamaican patois, and you're probably familiar with this, what they know and what comes first is the cuss words. I mean, this is the same, and to an extent, this is the same for language learners of any language. The bad words are the first words that I learned learning English, and I see it with German learners all the time, but it is very explicitly, the scene we just saw had very explicitly to do with protecting a reputation in the larger scope of this very diverse city. So protecting and managing reputation and managing a relation to other ethnicities in the city is very much part of living in the city, and is a qualitative topic of sociolinguistic study of a city here. Let's see, so there's a covert prestige for Jamaican Creole in Toronto at different levels. As a heritage code for, let's say, first and maybe second generation immigrants, speaking Jamaican Creole is a way of invoking island heritage. B, there in later generations, the Jamaican heritage becomes less important, but the Black Canadian identity, the minority identity becomes more important, and using Jamaican Creole in in linguistic performance becomes important as a symbolic device to allude to that and to foreground that identity. And C, using Jamaican Creole is a way of contributing to a new, I wrote hip, it's just hip wasn't necessary, to a new urban identity of, and this is no longer specifically Caribbean, this is a conglomerate of minority identities and even white Canadian kids in the very diverse neighborhoods in the Jane and Finch area, the Eglinton West area. There is, for the kids who have Caribbeans maybe 2 or 3 generations back in their heritage, there is this mix of dialects, of immigrant dialects, which is emerging and which is no longer specifically Caribbean, which only has Caribbean in its DNA, but which is spoken by different ethnicities, including the white kids. And this is a development that's very much parallel to what has been happening and observed since the 1990s in London as well. Multi-ethnolectalization. This order of indexicalities from A to C runs parallel to generations of Kianjiam identities and is in itself there to tell a story, from G1 foreign varieties, so from immigrant speech to generation 2 an elective code where you have code switching between Canadian English and Jamaican Creole. Your parents are from Jamaica and you have the option of speaking Canadian English or switching into Creole, or in the even subsequent generations where Jamaican Creole is a tributary to this urban youth vernacular or multi-ethnolect, which is emerging in Toronto. Here, I'm making that same point, but in tabular form. And by the way, these slides will be available through my website over the next few days, as soon as I managed to upload these. I was having some troubles earlier, but I put my web address on the bottom of the slides. So if you check tomorrow, you'll find the slides available there. So the functions of the codes change in parallel. The identity of the code is, in the first generation, foreign. It's immigrant speech. In the second generation, it's a localized code. It's something that Canadians speak electively. It's as a way to invoke their own or their family's ethnic heritage. And then in G2+N, the sociolinguistic function is to symbolize a localized and a generalized diverse urban identity. And it's no longer really Jamaican Creole at this point, but a multi-ethnolect, which is noticeably and detectably influenced by Jamaican Creole. Looking at this kind of development and looking at speech at these 3 different steps along the generational development, from the very young diasporic community to the medium, the middle stage, to the well-established diasporic community and their speech. This helps us write the sociolinguistics of a modern, globalized urban speech community. Speech communities which are difficult to describe because they're so complex and which in their existence pose a challenge to Lebovian sociolinguistics. That is basically the narrative of Blomart's sociolinguistics of globalization. He writes a lot about complexity and super diversity. Blomart has shown us, he passed away recently, and by the way, yes, he was a man. Many North Americans think that because his first name is Jan, Jan, that he was a woman. No, Jan is a Dutch male first name. He has shown us that there are ways in which Lebovian sociolinguistics fails to capture sociolinguistic phenomena of the present day. All this mixing, it's not all just one language where you have a vernacular of local English and a standard version of local English, and that's all that you need to describe. That's basically the narrative of Lebovian sociolinguistics coming out of New York City in the 1960s. Blommaert has shown it's much more complicated than that. Blommaert, his operative term is superdiversity. He gives it a little too much credit. Superdiversity is this fashionable social studies term that invokes a claim that the diversity that we're seeing in the present day is unlike anything we've ever seen before. So just invoking that term is usually done as a way of saying, well, because it's superdiversity, everything is new. And that's not necessarily always the case. There are problems with this term. The term is in itself a method of erasure for the diversities that have always existed since the year zero, the year of Christ's birth, even before the present times of accelerating diversification. There were extremely diverse locales even in the early Middle Ages, as Pavlenko shows in her 2018 critique of the term superdiversity. But I also kind of mentioned in a book review of Blommaert's book that came out in 2015. Happy to share that with anyone who is interested. So this is a bit of the background. Now, my fieldwork and the data I collected. I conducted fieldwork in Toronto at different points since 2006. There were some initial challenges creating contacts among the Toronto Jamaican community. I was warned going there. Linguist colleagues who work in Toronto at the different universities told me that they had sent out their students with the charge to conduct interviews with Jamaicans residing in Toronto or Canadians with Jamaican heritage, and it had never been successful, even if the students trying to conduct the interviews were themselves Jamaicans. There seems to be a general wariness of giving interviews among the Toronto Jamaican community. It was no different for me. Of course, it didn't help that I am so clearly not a member of the community myself at the time. So for about 4 to 6 months, I got absolutely nothing. And I was just turned down, and people did not want to be interviewed. The things turned around thanks to Louise Bennett. She had recently passed away, and I went to a memorial celebration at the University of Toronto, and I volunteered. I said, I'll help with anything. And the director said, well, you can run the light show. You can run the lights, the light board. So I did that. And I met a lot of people. Muta Waruka was there, singers, a lot of cultural luminaries. And I met a few Toronto Jamaicans who were interested in this, what I had in mind, the study of language and culture. And ultimately I was, Carrie, who we just saw, the radio host, she took me under her wings and introduced me around to her networks of reggae musicians in Toronto. And it is from this network that I started conducting sociolinguistic interviews. And so most of the Toronto Jamaicans in my interview corpus are reggae musicians or producers or radio hosts. So it's in that cultural space that this interest in language, basically, that I have, it helped me because reggae artists or generally word artists also have that interest in language. I have focused my study focuses on generation 2 and 2+N speakers. So I wasn't interested in the speech of immediate immigrants, but my specific question was, if you're born in Canada and your parents or grandparents are Jamaican, how do you go about mixing the cultures, and how does your language reflect that mix of cultures? I have fully transcribed about 48 interviews with Toronto Jamaican speakers. I also added more detailed conversation analysis type transcripts. Those are transcripts where you note every laughter, every sort of lip smack, and every bit of overlap is very precisely transcribed. And I use these for stylistic qualitative analysis, but I also, with the more regular orthographic transcripts that I had of everything else, I conducted forced alignment, which is a computational method where every consonant and every vowel is given a timestamp that denotes where it occurs in the recording. And with this timestamp, you're then able to extract specific spectrographic measurements specifically of the vowels. So in essence, I also use this data to create a very large corpus of vowel measurements, which I use to give a quantitative study of this mix of dialects that I'm interested in. So which linguistic features am I interested in? As a background, again, I'm using MLE, which is Multicultural London English, which evolved parallel to Toronto, except it's one generation older. In London, you had the Windrush generation, which came in starting in the late 1940s, compared to Canadian Jamaicans who started arriving in the late 1960s, so about one generation later. You can say that the Toronto community is an emerging diaspora community, whereas the London community is really a mature community, a mature diaspora community. The formation of these dialects, these multi-ethnic dialects, is the most interesting thing happening in big cities in Europe and North America right now. Except that in North America, this hasn't been studied very much. Not only do they raise questions for sociolinguistics, they're also surprisingly hard to capture with established models of language contact. What type of variety formation through contact sorry for the spelling error, do multi-ethnics represent? In the canonical language contact literature, we have this typology. There are pidgins, there are creoles, there are koines. I'm not going through a definition of all these types here, but the problem is, I'll just say that in general, that multi-ethnics aren't really any of these three. They represent something new. There is little research on the emerging multi-ethnic in Toronto. There is what Joseph Farquharson has done in Toronto. There is Derek Dennis. There are the few chapters that I've published. It is not yet at the level of authority. The body of literature on the multi-ethnic in Toronto is not yet at the level of authority that the literature on London has. So there's lots to do. Wink, wink, students in Mona. There's lots to do on Jamaican speech in Toronto. So the issue that needs to be studied is multi-ethnics are none of those three canonical types of contact-based new variety formation, Koine, pidgins, and Creole. Those who have researched multicultural London English stay away from calling it anything but MLE. They don't even call it a variety. They don't call it a Creole or any of those. We need to really make up our mind of what we're looking at, what kind of variety this is. I hope to contribute to that discussion, although I'm not going to solve that question today. I just want to show you now at the end of my lecture some of the findings, some of the linguistic analyses and findings that I have pursued. And this is, of course, a disaster. This is not very well visible. I need to take a quick break. Give me 1 minute. That's the only chance we have to really looking at that chart. I don't know why it has blown out of outside of the borders here. Or maybe to save time, I'll just narrate it. That might be the easiest. What we're looking at is parts of town of Toronto. Each panel represents a different part of town in Toronto where some of my interviewees came from. So we have Eglinton West, which is the core of the Jamaican community, the oldest Jamaican part of town in Toronto, Little Jamaica. Then we have Jane and Finch, which is the largest Jamaican part of town in Toronto. We have Maple, which is not known to be Jamaican at all. We have North York, which has a substantial but Jamaican population, but lower percentages. Scarborough, which is sort of a world in itself, a humongous part of town that is also known as having a high percentage of Jamaicans. West Toronto, which does not have a lot of Caribbean population at all. And what I'm looking at here is how separate are the vowels in the Bath class and in the trap class. So the trap class is the short ah vowel. Trap and Bath are very different vowels if you look at British English. You have trap and bath, ah, ah. So a short, low front vowel compared to a long, low back vowel. Now in North American English, those aren't really very different. Your trap and bath is sort of Midwestern, middle of the road American English, trap, bath. In Jamaica, they're also not different, except they're in a different position. They're low central, trap, bath. And Anna, I'm sorry, that may be all the Creole that I'm going to speak, although maybe I'll think of something in a minute. But what I'm looking at here is specifically trap and bath when they're followed by an M, N, or eng, so followed by a nasal versus not followed by a nasal. So since in Canadian English, trap and bath are roughly the same, and in the heritage speech in Jamaican Creole, they're also the same. I'm not looking at whether trap and bath are generally different. I'm only looking at whether trap and bath followed by N, M, and Engma is different from trap and bath not followed by M, N, and Engma. So followed by nasal, I'm thinking of words such as dance. And Canadian English, in Anglo-Canadian speech, you can get dance, a very, very much raised eh vowel. It's not dance, but dance. Or the word can, you know, can of worms. Can dance, I can dance. But then in other contexts, when there's not an N following, you get mat and hat and bag. So there's a difference in Canadian English between the prenasal trap and bath and the non-prenasal trap and bath. So in the graphs, this is based on 74,000 vowel tokens. In this graph, we're looking at whether these two groups are different or not. This kind of group is the trap bath vowel preceding nasals. The other group is the trap bath vowels not preceding nasals. Here in Eglinton West, the separation is not great, although you do see a distinct treatment of the two classes. Keep in mind, every speaker in this analysis is Jamaican, is generation 2 Jamaican. So these, basically in terms of heritage, all these speakers have the same input. It's just the part of town where they live. Whereas here, Scarborough is a very Jamaican part of town. See, they're largely coextensive. The two clouds overlap, which means that this prenasal raising rule, which is basically a mainstream Canadian feature, is not applied. Or you could say it's a rule of Canadian English that these Canadians, because they have Jamaican heritage and because they live in strongly Jamaican parts of town, they don't use that rule. They could. They're native Canadians. They could use that. It's in the cultural space, but they're in a specifically Jamaican cultural environment where they disregard it. Now look at the Jamaicans who come out of Maple, much higher socioeconomic level overall. Overall, much fewer Jamaicans here. That's where these two clouds are very separate. These speakers are fully adhering to that rule of mainstream Canadian English. And then we have West Toronto. The couple of Jamaicans or people with Jamaican heritage that I interviewed who come from West Toronto might as well be the only ones there. They really have a strong separation between those clouds. So what this shows us is that within the city, the local culture and the strength and degree of pronunciation of the local culture really matters. And it matters in terms of how strongly speech is shaped to indicate Jamaicanness, even though this is all Canadian English. This is Canadian English, but by people who have Jamaican heritages. I hope that makes sense. I want to look at one more slide because I feel that I'm probably running out of time. This here, again, it's much too big. What this here shows you, I have 3 panels for 3
and
different...
we're not seeing your slides.
Yes.
We're not seeing them. Is that deliberate?
You're not seeing the slides?
No, we're not. Share screen again.
I thought I was sharing this whole time. You didn't see the clouds that I was just talking about for 5 minutes?
Now, the last thing we saw was the skew diagrams.
Okay, let me try again. How about now? It's still,
yes.
it is still skewed and not very focused, but it may be all we have. Okay, I'm sorry about that. Okay, we're looking at the face vowel, the A vowel of English. It is well known that in North American English, the A vowel is a raising diphthong. It starts somewhere in the middle for the nucleus and then raises for the glide, A. And the same is the case for goat. It starts mid-high and raises, O. It is also well known that in basilectal Jamaican Creole, it's kind of the opposite trajectory. Starts high front or high back. So face starts high front, goat starts high back, and then they lower. So fierce and good, or as Beanie Man would say, ruo like a board. So uo and ie. Really phonogesturally the opposite of mainstream North American English and also British English, of course. I have here 3 groups of speakers. The Toronto Jamaicans that I'm primarily interested in are in the middle. On the left, I have a control group of heritage Jamaican Creole speakers. These are mesolectal Creole speakers recorded for the most part in Augusttown and some of them also more further inland in the mountains in the 1990s and early 2000s. There's one interview included here that Karen Kumabash conducted, I believe. These were given to me, shared with me by Professor Rickford. So that's the control group, the Heritage Jamaican Creole. And you can see here the goat vowel. This is the aggregate formant trajectories by all the speakers in this subgroup. You can clearly see that it lowers and centralizes. So that's ooh. And there's a similar kind of hook for the face vowels, which is not showing right now, but the shape is starts front, lowers and goes inward. And it's overall a shorter curve. Over here on the far right, you see the North American non-Jamaican Creole control group. So these are all Anglo and Italian Toronto English speakers. They have a clearly raising trajectory and a fairly long trajectory. So raising diphthongs, face, and the same for goat, goat. And now the Toronto Jamaican speech. So second generation and generation 2+N speakers with Jamaican heritage. They're exactly halfway between the two, which is absolutely fascinating. These are still raising trajectories, but they're clearly shorter, which reflects there's no other way of putting it. It reflects the heritage from Jamaican Creole. Shorter because a lot of these vowels are realized as monophthongs. So you're born in Canada, but your parents may, or one of your parents may come from Jamaica, then you're statistically significantly more likely to produce a monophthongal vowel for face or goat than you are if your parents are not from Jamaica, if your parents are Anglo or Italian, for example. This is just a really nice graph of showing you one of these ways. And ultimately, this is not about code switching. This is about forms of Canadian English, but this here is a way of showing how there is relatively subtle but highly systematic marking in different vowel classes that show influence from the heritage dialect. So what we're seeing is the stage of an incipient, but not yet florid multi-ethnolectalization. So I conclude that the study of language in the Toronto Jamaican community allows us to find public as well as private speech events that are able to reveal the ideological embedding of an immigrant variety. It also reveals in stark detail the systematicity of a new kind of local at the same time as translocal indexicality and linguistic variation, vis-a-vis which Lebovian sociolinguistics is basically powerless. It doesn't really address this, even though it's so important, but which is nonetheless best served by study by a sophisticated variationist statistical methods. So the methods that I use are very similar to those used in Lebovian sociolinguistics, variationist sociophonetics, basically, but what we need to do is open up our framework to more sub-community specific continua and feature pools in order to capture these little pictures, these little snippets of diversity that I believe we need to be studying in present day urban sociolinguistics. With that, I'd like to finish and thank you for your attention. And I'm, of course, I would be grateful for any questions that you might have.
Okay. Thank you so much, Professor Hinrichs. While persons are gathering their questions and their ideas together, I'll just be giving a plug about our linguistics programs that we have offered by the linguistics section in the department. And at the undergraduate level, we have a diploma in Caribbean Sign Language Interpreting, a diploma in Public Service Interpreting, a BA in Caribbean Sign Language Interpreting, BA in Linguistics, BA in Linguistics and Language Education, a BA in Language Communication and Society, and we have a special in Languages and Linguistics. At the postgraduate level, we have the MA in English Language, the postgraduate diploma in Linguistics, which is our bridge for those persons who would love to do postgraduate work in linguistics, but did not do linguistics at the undergraduate level. And we have the MPhil in linguistics and the PhD in linguistics. If you want more information on any of these programs, please feel free to contact us at dllp@uwimona.edu.jm. That's dllp@uwimona.edu.jm, or the linguistics helpdesk.uwimona@gmail.com. We would take our first question now. The first question goes back, Lars, to one of your diagrams. If it is possible for you to put it on the screen so that persons can see it. Even though it was a little skewed, they would still like to be able to see what it looks like. And while you're finding that, I'm going to read the next question. Is G2 plus N mainly a youth vernacular, and how would you account for the Ford brothers? Yes.
Okay, let me answer that first. G2 plus N, it's a group of speakers. So people who are Jamaicans of the second generation or higher, third generation, fourth generation. So it is not a form of speech, but those people have speech that shares certain aspects in common. Could you repeat the question, the second part of the question that it was asking about?
How would you account for the Ford brothers?
Their use of when they switch into patois, or especially the older one, Rob Ford. Yeah, that's a special. It's not their heritage, right? So they're in a slightly different situation. So they've acquired basically the first generation Jamaican Creole as a second dialect, or that they use it in code switching. It's performative. It's pretty good. It's not native-like, but pretty good. It's kind of the phenomenon that you see among the white kids that hang out a lot with G1 speakers, G1 and G2. So the earlier stages of multi-ethnicalization. In London, the parallel that I see to this is the Hewitt book. The Roger Hewitt, who wrote a book before Rampton's book on crossing came out, where he wrote about white kids who speak a lot of forms of Caribbean Creoles. So it's an early stage at the beginning of the multi-ethnicalization, I think, that they represent.
All right.
And then I brought up this chart again, and what was the question about it?
They just wanted to be able to look at it.
Okay, and I'm so sorry. I will fix this and make it nicer for the version that I'll put on my website.
Okay. All right. So the next question that we have is, was there a difference with pronunciation between the G2 and G3 groups?
Yes, so G2, most typically, although when I talk about generations, it involves a lot, it involves some stylization on my part. So in a way, I am, as a linguist now, ideologically simplifying the picture. But generation 2, I think, is the generation that is competent in code switching between local English and heritage Creole. And then the subsequent generations typically don't really code switch. They have slang words that they borrow from Jamaican Creole, or maybe some phrases like "you don't know," which I always enjoy. Apparently, has long ago died out in Kingston, but is still used in Toronto and London. So phrases and words, but not fully functional code switching into a syntactically full-blown Creole, and some more consistent phonetic marking of the kind that I showed here in the charts. So the much higher likelihood of pronouncing the face vowel monophthongally, for example, would be part of it. That's the generation 3 and up. Yeah.
Okay. But the last bit you just said actually answers part of another question, which was, did you consider the generation to which the speakers belong as a factor affecting variation? And if yes, are there any clear patterns associated with a particular generation of speakers? Do you have anything else you'd like to add?
Yeah, I used them in statistical modeling. I didn't show any multivariate models here, but let me say this: the generation in itself, I think, is helpful as a heuristic in talking about the data, and yet it is not as significant in the statistical picture as, for example, the parts of town. The parts of town make much clearer predictions. So there are what we're looking at right now, for example, they are better in predicting what you're going to see and what kind of sociophonetic patterns you're going to find. Part of town, then also gender is more important than generation. Yeah, I hope that answers the question.
Okay. Another related question, which statistical software did you use for your data analysis, and how well did it suit your investigation?
I used R, and it suited it extremely well. You could do all of it in Python, and I could have done it in Tableau, which Tableau is much easier to use than R or Python. The problem is Tableau only works when you already know what you need to do, which methods you're going to use. But if you're exploring the data and trying out different things, then you need a scripting language such as R or Python, is my opinion. But if you're a linguist who is conducting postgraduate studies, for example, my recommendation is wholeheartedly for R.
All right. Could you explain why the control group is the heritage group?
There's two control groups. One is Jamaicans without Canadian influence, and the other is Canadians without Jamaican influence. And my primary study group is the group that mixes both. That's the one in the middle. So in this chart that we're looking at right now, we only have the primary study group, but here we have the three groups. This is basically Augusttown, the gates of Mona campus. So natives from that area. This here is 8th generation white Canadians or Anglo-British Canadians. And this here is the group that mixes the speech of those two groups as input.
Another question, what makes Toronto different so that this distinctive form on English developed? And would the situation be the same, for example, in Ontario?
You mean Ottawa? Toronto is in Ontario, but maybe the person means Ottawa or Quebec. What makes Toronto different is that it has such a large Jamaican community. 3 or 4% is a lot. Other big cities have a lot of Jamaicans as well, but probably not as many. I mean, Toronto is huge to begin with, and then there's a few 100,000 Jamaicans. So it's a critical mass. There is an actual community, and that this matters is what we see in this analysis of parts of town. You need a critical mass for some types of heritage preservation and tradition to exist. You see this lack of separation between the clouds is strongest probably in Jane and Finch, which happens to be the part of town that has the highest density of Jamaican population. And current there.
All right, thank you. Are there any other questions that anyone is in the process of sending? Yes, here we are. Was there a difference in the responses between genders?
Yes. I don't want to say anything wrong. It depends on which phonetic feature you looked at. I looked at 9 different phonetic features, and there were typically gender differences, but the narrative emerging depended on which feature. Some features are very stereotypical, and for example, features that are stereotypically Jamaican are the ones that tend to be embraced and deployed more by male speakers. Things by which I mean the strut vowel, the wedge, in Jamaican tends to get backed and raised to so, you know, cut with a knife, and love, cut and love. That's a feature that male speakers use more than females. And then there are other that are more subtle and also much more frequent, like the face vowel, the A becoming E. That is something that you find more consistently in the speech of females.
Okay, thank you. The next question, given that you describe the Canadian diaspora as emerging, do you have plans to collect further data in years to come?
Part of me thinks that I should, and what I know is I need to first finish this part of the project because I've been at it for 12 years. And if I ever want another promotion in my job, then I really need to get my book finished. But there is so much more to do. Like I said, I only know of 3 linguists, myself included, who work on this. There's so much to do. And particularly somebody should go into high schools and interview the youngsters, because they're going to have the most advanced stage of this multi-ethnic. And go into parts of town where there are a lot of Jamaicans, but don't just interview Jamaicans, but everyone who is in those schools. So schools in Scarborough and schools in the Jane and Finch area. I think that will be absolutely fascinating, and I'm sure the Canadian government has great grants to do that work.
All right, we have an interesting question on pop culture. So the singer Drake has been castigated for imitating Jamaican. How would you evaluate his language use? Is it code switching? Is it real? Is it fake? What are your thoughts?
Right, and he has one Jewish and one African American parent, but no Jamaican heritage, if I remember correctly. I looked him up one time. I'm not a Drake, I don't know his music that well, but I know he's one of the most famous humans on the planet right now. I think it is using forms of Jamaican as multi-ethnolectal or urban youth vernacular speech. It is performative. I mean, he's also from a fairly educated family. So if he was American and he used African American vernacular English, I think that's what I would compare it to. I think Jamaican patois sort of functionally counts as or takes the functional place that African American vernacular English takes in the United States, at least among rappers. I think it's community specific. As you recall, my work was mostly among reggae musicians, slightly older than the rap people. But if you look into the Canadian rap community, Cardinal Official has this song, Bacardi Slang, which basically equates Caribbean patois in Canada to African American vernacular in New York among the rappers. So basically, Cardinal Official is saying if you're a Canadian rapper, you use patois. If you're an American rapper, you use AAVE. And so I think it's strategic and performative, but also community specific, what Drake does. I don't know if that answers it, but those are my thoughts.
It does. Thank you. We have one more question. How do you think that this research can be extrapolated to work in the Caribbean situation? For example, Jamaican, Creole, and other CARICOM territories. Trinidad and Tobago is one such territory where when immigration regulations became stricter in the US, we had a greater influx of Jamaicans in Trinidad and Tobago. So, and you see Jamaicans are also settling in other CARICOM territories. They're heading southwards now instead of northwards. So how do you think your research can be extrapolated to the CARICOM situation?
Extrapolate, I guess just the idea that one can look at dialect mixing and one can conduct quantitative work with strong cultural embedding. So the extrapolation is mostly methodological. I think that is fascinating. So in that case, if you go to Port of Spain, looking at Jamaicans in Port of Spain, North American speech is mostly out of the picture, I imagine, except performatively here and there, but the more systematically present dialects would be Trinidadian vernacular speech, or as Joanne was explaining to me yesterday, at least 5 identifiable varieties of English in Trinidad. So anyway, the ones that are present in the situation, and then Jamaican varieties. I think it would be fascinating. You'd start out by trying to describe which varieties are there that go into the mix, try to make that point, try to make a convincing argument. You would try to record interviews and try to find phonetic measures that allow you to show where and how the mixes occur.
Okay, that sounds wonderful. I hope our graduate students who are listening and are still deciding on their research topic got some further thought. We have another question. For those who are not musicians, producers, or radio hosts, was there a difference in their responses?
because of my particular trajectory of finding access and finding people who were willing and interested in speaking to me, that's almost the only kind of person I interviewed, and some non-musicians, but they were the same age group or the same friendship groups. Although I will say in the first months while I was still looking for interviewees, I volunteered at the Jamaican Canadian Association as a computer tutor for a group of seniors. So these were all retired nurses and old ladies and old men from Jamaica who had me come in and teach them Microsoft Word, and it was just wonderful. But because they were all first generation immigrants, I didn't even want to interview them. I just went there to do something with the community. And yes, of course, their speech was entirely different because there was no immediately discernible influence of North American forms of English. They speak like seniors in Kingston would speak for the most part. I took a wonderful, very brief video of a group of 6 old ladies sitting in front of a TV watching a video of Louise Bennett singing every time I think about Jamaica. What's that come on me?
All right. We seem to have lost Professor Hinrichs momentarily. While he is logging back in, I'd just like to draw your attention to the upcoming podcast by Braadkyaas Jamaican with Mrs. Susanna Belgrave, speaking with Yasu Safari. So please, you don't have to disappear. When this function is finished, you can stay tuned to YouTube, Braadkyaas Jamaican. Please laugh at my patois. It's my one MC joke. And listen to Mrs. Susanna Blagrove discussing different topics on, here I go with my jokes again, Talk to Me, with the very well-known dub poet and philosopher, Yasu Afari. So please do stay tuned to the channel. I'd also take this opportunity to highlight our programs again. And you can contact us at 927-1641, 876-927-1641, or email us at dllp@uwimona.edu.jm. And the undergrad programs again, the Diploma in Caribbean Sign Language Interpreting, Diploma in Public Service Interpreting, the BA in Caribbean Sign Language Interpreting, the BA in Linguistics, BA in Linguistics and Language Education, BA in Language Communication and Society, BA in Languages and Linguistics. That's a special, so you get to learn at least 4 languages and learn about linguistics in that degree program. It's very interesting. And for the postgraduate students, we have a diploma in linguistics for persons who need to join us in linguistics without having done linguistics at the undergraduate level. We have the MA in English language, the MPhil in linguistics, and the PhD in linguistics.
I just wanted to say sorry for dropping off, if you can hear me. My laptop ran out of battery, so now I'm on my phone.
All right, welcome back, Professor Hinrichs. We have not received any additional questions for you. Is there anyone who has another question? We'll just give you a few seconds in case you wish to send it through. All right, we don't see any more coming in, so thank you.
Hold on, don't run. I just had a little young woman pop into my office who was saying to me, what happens when the 3rd generation does not recognize that the language that they're speaking is actually originating in Jamaica and influenced by Jamaicans? And she's saying it out of her own experience of encountering younger Canadians who speak the Toronto English, but don't recognize. In fact, her example is that they didn't even know that popcorn was not Canadian. And I find that amazing. I'm happy to hear Lars's thoughts on that.
Yeah, at that stage, when it's no longer specifically used as a heritage dialect, and it sort of generalizes as a youth dialect, the heritage becomes innocuous. It becomes the semantic bleaching that happens, right? So after a while, the indexical link between the code and the cultural source, which is Jamaican identity, the island, it blurs it. Yeah, it bleaches out. And that's part of it. So some people will know about the sources of some of the linguistic material, but others won't.
Yeah, right. Any other questions coming in? Thank you so much for that. All right. So at this point, we would like to give our thanks again, and we can do I will, on behalf of everyone, do a digital applause for
Thank you
our
very
speaker
much
this evening. Thank you so much, Professor Hinrichs. And as you said, it is so nice to have you back in our space.
Nice to be had. Yeah.
Yes. It wasn't undergrad, it was postgrad. We were both postgrad students when we met on that wonderful Preston Hall way back more than 20 years ago. So it really is nice to see you again.
Yes.
And Joseph is pointing out that he was an undergrad at the time.
Yes. Yeah, he was, for all practical intents and purposes, the boss of the hall. He was hall chair, I think.
Yes.
But you were appointed.
He became hall chair the year after you met, yes.
Oh, really? Okay. Oh, yeah, that might be, yeah. And you were appointed by Professor Devenish to meet the visitor from abroad and make sure that I don't get lost. And I remember you introducing me to jerk chicken that very night, because it was the night, it was like Monday, the jerk night on Preston Hall.
Yes, it was my country, the jerk man. All right. So all you students out there in undergrad and postgrad, this is the kind of event you can aspire to down the road, become an academic, and get ready to do many guest lectures and presentations to share with the world how language structure and language use and all the knowledge about it can really provide good insight for policy making in the public sphere, as well as the private sector. All right, so thanks again, Professor Hinrichs. Really, really wonderful to have you.
Thank you very much. It was a great honor, yes. And I will see you, I hope, again this, I guess tomorrow, as we finish up the review, which has also been a great honor and an experience of a lifetime to be involved in that.
Yes. At this time, we're going to hand over to Mrs. Tanya Joy Wilkins Miller, who is a PhD candidate and lecturer in our section. Handing over to you, Tanya.
Good evening, everyone. It is my pleasure to deliver the vote of thanks. As Karen just indicated, I'm Tanya Wilkins Miller, and I'm a lecturer in the Department of Language, Linguistics, and Philosophy. And that's the department that has brought you this lecture in collaboration with the Quality Assurance Unit. Professor Hinrichs, thank you for delivering this lecture on why we need diaspora linguistics, challenges to establish models of language contact. We've learned so much about language diversity and how the speech of Jamaicans impacts the linguistic and the cultural landscape of Canada. We've also learned that our understanding of what is happening in Canada with Jamaicans can be extended to language variation and diversity around the world. So thank you for your encouragement to our students and letting them know that there is so much work to be done in the area of Caribbean linguistics. I know in particular, my phonology students benefited a great deal from this lecture, seeing how you displayed your findings from your research. We would also like to thank you for acting in the role of team lead for the quality assurance review. It's good to have you back, even virtually. Hopefully soon we'll have you back physically. Thank you to other members of the quality assurance review team. There is Mrs. Nadine Logan Ashley of the Michael University College, Dr. Joanne Ferreira of the St. Augustine campus, and Ms. Sanya Compton, the student representative from the Cave Hill campus. Thank you, Dr. Anna Perkins and your team from the Quality Assurance Unit for your guidance and encouragement. Thank you, Dr. Vivette Milson-White, our head of department, for your unwavering support. Thanks to our section coordinator, Dr. Trisselle Messam, who, as her role suggests, coordinated the work of all the lectures in the section so that we could be ready for this quality assurance review. Thank you again. Thanks to all the lecturers of the department and in particular the linguistics section for all the work you've put into this review and for all the work that you've put into making this event possible. Thank you to our moderator / Master of Ceremonies, Dr. Karen Kumabash, for ensuring that we started on time. Thanks for providing some background to this lecture and having this event run smoothly, and also ensuring that the students know about what our section has to offer. Thank you to Brittany Palmer, our undergraduate student who helped to monitor the interaction in the chat on YouTube. And thanks to you, our audience. Thanks, students. Thank you, everyone, for joining us this evening. Have a good evening, everyone.
And thank you from me again.
Yeah. Thanks again. I'm just iterating, Tanya. Thank you to our audience, to our past and present students. We also see past staff like Alison Irvin. We see Joanne Ferreira in there, who was with us for some time back in 2007 and 2008. Thanks to other members of our department like Sandra Minot, who's present from the language section. We really appreciate all of our colleagues, students, fellow linguists from other institutions, other persons at the university and other universities. Thank you so much for your interest in why it is we really need to re-examine how we look at languages juxtaposing with each other. Stay safe and walk well. Thank you.
Na na na, me have to represent from school, the University of the West Indies. Na na na, na 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 na. Come to you if you want to see quality. Hey, come up your way. We have a whole heap of facilities now. Just come to you if quality is what you want to see. Come up on your way. We have a whole heap of facilities now. If you're broke, no money, no scholarship and no fee everybody. Just want to check the bursary. They'll always help you get through. Online portals with everything. Can't tell me this on a spoon feeding. It has all my classes with all my buses, and all I want is no more than that. Come to you if you want to see quality. Hey, come up on your way. We have a whole heap of facilities now. Just come to you if quality is what you want to see. Come up on your way. We have a whole heap facilities. Now the lecturers request student feedback. First time I see, couldn't believe that they actually cared what I thought about how they taught. The education delivery is dynamic. If you don't learn by listening, don't panic. Audio visuals are in classes and office hours for running credits. UWI is always improving systems. Heard some students have become victims. No security day and night. Security patrol day and night. And if you want to be a success, nobody does it best. And if you want to be put to the test, nobody does it best. Come to UWI if you want to see quality. Hey, come up on UWI. We have a whole heap of facilities now. Yes, just come to UWI if quality is what you want to see. Come up on UWI. We have a whole heap of facilities now. Endless possibilities. Them up over 50 degrees. Where's on that tropical breeze and give you qualities like these. Nobody, you will take the lead with these. So sorry, the schools can't compete. Excelling in sports, of course. Premier League football team and big job course. Check out the Olympics high school. I represent from school. The University of the West Indies. Na 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 na. The University of the West Indies. Na 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 na.